What are invasive alien species? Invasive alien species are species who do not reside in their natural habitat and can cause damage to their new ecosystem. Invasive alien species can cause problems for other organisms in their environment because oftentimes they prey on the organisms who already live there. There are thousands of invasive species all over the world. How do they invade? They can invade through wind, water, and oftentimes humans unintentionally spread them across the world. Here are 3 examples of invasive alien species. One is the zebra mussel. It was originally in Russia and Europe. Another is the feral pig. It was in North Africa and Russia. And then Asian carp was from Asia. And now they're all in the United States, causing lots of problems.
For the costs of invasive alien species, the economic impact in the United States is $128 billion annually and $131 billion cumulatively. And also many of the effects and costs aren't in terms or can't be converted into monetary terms. So as far as the provisioning services, so these are anything produced from an ecosystem such as material or energy. So these would be things such as food, fiber, and fuel. A couple examples of this. The yellow-starred thistle in California is an invasive species and it reduces crop yields. So basically, it costs the state annually around $7.65 million in lost livestock forage, and it also can cost the ranchers $9.45 million in out-of-pocket expenses. So that right there is just a lot of money, and that's for one species, and the same species also depletes soil moisture, and so that can also cost between $16 to $75 million per year in lost water. So just with this this one example right here, it's very evident that how much an impact these invasive alien species can have just in terms of money. As far as regulating services, these are anything in an ecosystem, or these are defined as the benefits obtained from the regulation of ecosystem processes. And some examples of these, I won't go through all of them, but some are the golden apple snails in Southeast Asia. They create large amounts of algae in the water, so they basically dirty the water up, and this can seriously affect the water purification system because it can cost a lot of money to make the water clean again. As far as disease regulation, a lot of these species can carry disease, and what this will do, it will lead to a lot of money in order to control the disease. So millions of dollars in trying to basically just help with treatment of the disease, trying to prevent it, stuff like that. And then lastly, the certain species can increase flood and fire risks. So in order to decrease these risks, it can cost the United States around $10 million to remove these plants that would cause these flood and fire risks. As far as cultural services, for recreation and tourism, there can be a problem in visiting or traveling because of these species. The places just won't let any tourists come, or there will be other problems that arise. For Lake Tahoe, for example, even just as small as a 1% loss in revenue could cost them $500,000 a year. And then for aesthetic beauty, it can be costly if the sales of some of these invasive species are prohibited because some people, it's very appealing to them, the certain plants and things like that. But for other people, they don't think it's right to be selling these. So if their sales are prohibited, then that can be costly for the nurseries as well.
In the next two slides, I will be discussing the benefits of invasive species on provisioning services, regulating services, and cultural services. The benefits of provisioning services include them being referred to as ecosystem goods that can be used for firewood, medicine, charcoal, etc., among other things by the locals. Another example would be the controlled invasive species, the red-berried juniper, used for increasing livestock production on farms. A third example being Midwestern invasive species grasses, having shallow roots and consuming less water from their surroundings compared to their native counterpart. Benefits of regulating services include farmers using non-native species to balance their crops and livestock throughout the seasons. An example would be the non-native honeybees used to pollinate crops in North America. Benefits of cultural services include invasive species for being aesthetically pleasing for decorations in nurseries, homes, stores, etc. In the picture below, you can see some non-native flowers used in nurseries around the U.S. Another example for cultural services is the Polynesian race of the feral pig being integrated into the hunting culture of Hawaii.
With invasive species, they can have both positive and negative impacts, and it's a matter of finding whether it is more positive or negative, which in most cases it is a more negative impact. These are case studies done on some of the invasive species in different areas. This first one is the woody plant invasive alien species in ecosystem services in South Africa. The woody plant has invaded here, and while it's been creating some positive impacts for the forestry industry, it has been overall impacting their water sources and has decreased the amount of water available to downstream users. It's also been impacting their pollination and displaces native plants. So they did some research on this, and then they found that because there are such negative impacts, that they started the Working for Water initiative, which is a policy action that involves the removal of these woody plants. Then in this next one, which is a rather popular one, you have zebra mussels. So this is ecosystem services impacted by zebra mussels, and this is in the Great Lakes in this example, because this is a rather popular thing where they're deliberately introduced because the main thing about them is that they filter water. Well, the issue is they take in so many toxins that, yes, it filters the water, but then it goes on to other species. And then they've also been causing a lot of damage to water pipes. They injure people's feet when they're on the beaches too much. And it's a rather well-researched invasive species. The zebra mussel is still debated whether it is more positive or negative, but from this it shows that it is rather more of a negative impact in this case. In this final example, with synergies and trade-offs associated with the impacts from invasive species, we have the impacts of feral pigs on ecosystem services in Hawaii. So what has happened here is that the Polynesian feral pig and European boar have hybridized and moved into the forest of Hawaii. So now it has become a major part of their culture, as this was 200 years ago. It's become a major part of their culture, and it's provided positive goods and services through meat, culture, and religious value. However, the thing with these pigs is that they're very destructive, and they've been ransacking food crops and probably negatively impacting a range of regulatory services by uprooting different plants for their breeding. Through this, it also creates breeding habitat for infectious mosquitoes. There's not a lot of data on the impacts of feral pigs on ecosystem services that sustain life, and this is definitely an example of an invasive species that is not equally valued by all people.
There are several measures taken to control invasive species. The first measure is to use economic incentives and disincentives such as taxes, fines, and grants. The second is to invest in education on invasive alien species and the diverse impacts on its affected ecosystem. And the third one is more public support for pre-screening and trade regulations. There are also other ways to control invasive species, such as biological control, which is the intentional manipulation of natural enemies by humans for the purpose of controlling the targeted invasive species. There's also mechanical control, which includes mowing, hoeing, cultivation, and hand pulling. And lastly, there's chemical control, which is the use of herbicides, a toxic poison, that is aimed to decrease the population of the targeted invasive species.
All these invasive species can be located in Lexington, Kentucky. I wanted to show these 3 species because the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources called them nuisances because native species have not adapted to compete with these species. So let's start with the rusty crayfish. These species are a problem because they eat small fish, insects, and fish eggs. All these things could destroy an underwater habitat. Next is the garlic mustard plant. These plants are an aggressive competitor for light, water, and nutrients, and they will remove native plants from their habitats. And lastly, we have the zebra mussels. Zebra mussels can form layers upon layers of living mussels. Because of this, they can clog our pipes, and they steal food sources from native species. In the future, we should definitely control these invasive alien species. Now, not all invasive species are nuisances, but we should still control them and regulate them based on their benefits and harms. Now, you may be asking yourself, why is this important? Well, these invasive alien species can disrupt the environment and they can cause a serious threat to native species of environments, even for us humans as well. Invasive alien species will require us to pay for their damages and their impact to our societies, such as the example I gave about zebra mussels costing us millions to clean the Great Lakes and take the pipes.